Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining with us for this episode. We have Andi Schubert with us today. Andy, it's an honor, it's a privilege, pleasure to have you today with us to talk about doing the humanities. Andi Schubert is a senior lecturer at the Department of Language Studies, the Open University of Sri Lanka. And he's also a Fulbright scholar and has completed his master's degree at Kansas State University, the USA. Andy, thank you so much for being with us today. This was a long overdue conversation, but I think somehow we managed to find some time to talk about, how you, especially, position yourself in relation to the crisis in the humanities and arts, especially in the context of Sri Lanka. So we will first give a little kind of a brief intro to our listeners and viewers about how you position yourself in the field, or whether you are not positioning yourself within the field, your research and academic engagements, and how do you relate to the crisis in the humanities in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you so much, Trini, for having me on this podcast. I've been a big admirer, and I'm really glad to see the way it has grown since you started it. I think you're now done 11, and
11.
More I'm sure are coming. And so it's a singular honor to be on this podcast. It's actually my first interview with anyone about my life and my work. And so I'm really glad it's with you.
Thank you.
This is a really important topic, and I'm really glad to be part of this conversation and to join all the others who have also made some really interesting contributions. So thank you so much for having me. I'm deeply honored. And yeah, let's. So I guess your first question was about my position. Well, I guess that's always, it seems like a really easy question, but for me, it's always a very difficult question to answer. Okay. In part because on paper, my position is that I'm someone who's qualified in English literature, right? Like my BA is in English literature, my MA is in English. I have a BA in English and an MA in English. So on paper, I'm an English studies person. But in practice, what I do is not really English. I feel like I use the tools that I learned in English studies, the reading skills, the interpretive skills, the commitment to a hermeneutic philosophical tradition. But I try to apply those in more of the social sciences, or that is most traditionally constituted as the social sciences. So for a long time, my work has been kind of focused on questions relating to identities and identifications, which is kind of almost always more something that sociologists or anthropologists, maybe sometimes even political scientists are concerned about. And more recently, my work has kind of, within those same kind of problematics, has moved a little bit more into history and political science. So I feel like I'm still doing English studies in the way I do it, in my methodology, I suppose. But my concerns aren't what people in English studies traditionally. I think it's changed a lot. But I think traditionally it's been very text bound, and text has been understood as, either language or literature, but I've been kind of moving into like, bringing those kind of skills into other arenas. So and also my kind of a lot of my formative training was at the Social Scientists Association. So and at the Social Scientists Association, the colleagues I worked with there were very much people who did a lot of surveys. So I feel like I've also seen the dark side, as it were, right? Like, if you're talking about the humanities and the social sciences, the more empiricist kind of quantitative kind of side of the social sciences have also kind of been really I mean, it's not something that I'm necessarily, drawn to or influenced by, but like it's definitely something that has shaped my work and has been important to me. So, so I feel in a lot of ways, if you ask me to locate myself in relation to this, I feel like in a way a bit of a familiar stranger. I'm like I know my way around English and the humanities, but I also constantly feel that my work is not humanist enough, nor is it social scientist enough, right? Like, and so I feel it's kind of in a way, for me, the way I understand it, and I think it's also a fairly problematic way, and I can see lots of people having questions about it. But I think that my work is fairly queer in its refusal, in a way, to fit into a box, and so I guess I locate myself as being, I guess, familiar stranger, an outsider, an inside outsider, and an outside insider, right? Like to the humanities. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But yeah, so I I guess that's what I would say about how I locate myself.
You have also been telling me in a previous discussion how your work has been, for the most part, inflected by a certain sense of uncertainty. We will also expand on that a bit, Andy, because as academics, what we are sort of driven to is within our establishments is to be very certain about what we are doing, and to sort of push us into be establish ourselves in these institutions. So how do you kind of see that uncertainty inflected in your work?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I have many answers to this question. It's a really great question, Tiridi. Thank you for asking it. I think there is, for me, an ontological kind of position to it, right? Like I feel like growing up in Sri Lanka with parents from two different ethnic groups, two minority ethnic groups, I had to learn to be learn very fast, and it took me a while to learn how to be okay with not being certain of where you fitted in or where I fitted in, right? Like where, when someone would ask me, are you Sinhalese? And I'd say no, but then they would ask me, are you Tamil? And I would say yes either, right? And I couldn't say that I was Burgher, I couldn't say that I was Muslim, so it took me a long time, and there was a kind of a deep sense of discomfort with that lack of certainty, right? Like, because when I looked around me, I felt like, there was so much certainty around me. People seemed very much more confident and comfortable with the inhabiting the kind of the lines that seem to be drawn around them. Whereas for me, those lines were always fuzzy and blurry, and I was never certain of where those lines were for me. And I mean, I studied in the Sinhala medium, but Sinhala was never my first language. So I've had all these ways in which I've had to kind of navigate not really fitting in as as a young person growing up in a country which was very conscious about ethnic identity. Right? And it's taken me a long time to learn how to live with that and allow that to drive my work. Because I feel like when you're uncertain, you either learn to live with it or you do your best to be as hardcore certainties, right? Like that's what you right? But for me, it's taken me a long time to just let that go and allow the uncertainty to drive my work. That's kind of a more ontological answer to your question, I guess. But I also think increasingly, and I've found kind of, I would say, people who also are the people who have tried to think through that, right, and use it as like a powerful theoretical but also political kind of commitment. And so my friends who know me really well know that I kind of treat Stuart Hall like my spirit animal, right? Like I love his work. I think it's really great. But part of the reason that I think his work speaks to me is that I find him to be another person who seems to be very hesitant around certainties or certitude. And he has this famous essay called "Marxism Without Guarantees," right, where he challenges the idea that the base determines everything in the final instance, right? And he's saying, well, if that's the case, then why bother with politics? Right, like essentially that's his question. Like then, like ideology doesn't matter, right? Like superstructure doesn't matter. Everything is about the base. He kind of says that no, that position. He questions that position, right? And I think in really important ways. And for me, what his work has done, and that's why it's Marxism without guarantees, right? Like so. And so, and what does it mean to work without guarantees? So I guess in a lot of my work, I've tried to bring that kind of thinking. I don't know if I do it successfully. I don't know if I do it well. I'm still working that out. But I feel like I want to be driven by that commitment to allowing the uncertainty just to go into, like, say, an archive or go into a text or go into a space and just not be sure of where I'm going. So I kind of feel my way around. And that means also that I'm constantly doubting myself and the conclusions I've reached, and constantly replaying conversations or analyses that I've had, and reading something I've written and never thinking that it's good enough because I feel like, it's still, there's something more to be said, right? And so but I think there's something important to be said about being driven by uncertainty, because when I look around me, I feel the opposite is true, right? And like in the humanities, in the social sciences today, I feel like we are pushed to certainties, right? Like we want measurable metrics that will give us certainty. We want all these, we want categories that will give us certainty, right? Like, and there seems to be some kind of thinking that, if you get the categorization right, if you get the methodology right, if you get the analytics right, you can crack a code, right? Like, you can open up something that has been hidden from you. But for me personally, and I mean, I realize it's different for everyone else, but for me personally, I find that a very, I don't want to use the word, but I mean, for me personally, it's a limiting prospect, because I feel like if I already know where I want to end up or know what I'm committed to, if I have those certainties, then, what's the point of doing anything? Like, it's for me, it seems pointless. But then the flip side of it is that, like, I always wonder, like, is there ever something that I can claim as final, right? Like, Hall never wrote a book under his own name in his lifetime. So all his work has come out posthumously. And part of the reason he never wrote a book was he said that, when you write a book, that's like the final say. Right? And so he wrote like tons and tons of articles, but never wrote a book. And he was offered some prize by some foundation for making a definitive contribution. And he refused the prize because he said, I have not done anything definitive. So, I mean, so I think about that like a lot, right? Like, what does it mean to work in that way? means also realizing that a lot of our work then becomes contingent, right? Like we work without guarantees. So, and that's really difficult, right? Like, because you always assume that, you're going to work, you're going to do something really important. But if you work without guarantees, there's no guaranteeing that it's going to get back. It's, you still do the work.
Absolutely.
And for me, I feel like, it's been an important mode of being, but also an important mode of thinking and approaching kind of the work, to kind of, question things that are given to me, right? Like, because that for me is also the work of ideology, right? Like ideology is the thing that makes us believe that there are certainties in this world. And because there are certainties, we don't question them. A lot of my more recent work has been around the census. And as you know, in Sri Lanka, when we talk about censuses, there are very clear ways in which the census tells us, right? Like the clear things, the number of ethnic groups in the country, and the fact that these ethnic groups have existed for, centuries, right? These are all things that we are taught as children as certainties, right? And then the more time I spend in the archive, the more I realize it's not as certain as it is made out.
Right? Okay.
And so a lot of my work has been to understand the ways in which those ideas of certainty have been established, the price at which it has been borne, what it has cost. And so that's another way, I think, for me, that's a theoretical kind of commitment and a methodological commitment. And I guess third thing I would say is it's also effective.
Okay.
For me. I feel like affect is something that is so much a part of the humanities now that we don't really talk about it. But like, for me, I feel like I'm constantly wondering about my interactions with people, and I mean, when people talk to me, they assume that I'm just very confident, very very confident, very self-assured kind of person.
Okay.
But in my head, it's very different. Like in my head, I'm constantly uncertain about the things I've said or the things I've done and how I've done it, and whether I should have said this or should I not. And I feel like, it's also, and I feel like maybe I'm not the only one who feels that, but like, I think people are also very good at kind of managing those, or maybe they're better than me at managing those uncertainties. But for me, it's also effective as well, I think. And I also wonder about, those possibilities that come out of not being so sure about the things we do. Yeah, so that's a really long answer to a really, really great question. So
no worries, Andi.
Sorry for rambling on like this.
No, not at all. We will move on to talking about the humanities as as an established field of inquiry, its purposes, its functions. Why has it been established as a field of inquiry? Sort of like moving on to lay the groundwork for our discussion. And can we discuss a little bit about the humanities as a field? And perhaps we can later on move on to discuss its crisis, particularly its how its crisis affects generally and more specifically to us.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, the question of the humanities, it's a little fuzzy. Like people, where I went to the University of California for my undergrad, and when I was there, we had a, when fights happened, it was always arts versus science, right? Like, so there was like this umbrella term for arts, but I was in the faculty of humanities, and there was a faculty of social sciences as well, right? And it was never really clear where the boundaries were between humanities and social sciences. And I guess like a lot of people kind of just say the arts and assume that it covers everything. Right? But yeah, and I think it's important that we also think about where these terminologies come from, right? Like what is it about the humanities that is different to the social sciences? And again, my way of understanding it, right? I could be wrong, and I encourage the listeners to also find this out for themselves. Is that at some point in the late 19th and maybe 20th century, is late 19th. I think in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century, there is a big debate, right? Like, Darwin has happened, and there's a big debate about the need to bring in the kind of the empiricist approaches that are used in the natural sciences into the study of human society, right? And there's the challenge to that position was from a group of people who believe that no, there is something unique about human society, that you cannot treat human society and you cannot understand human society the way you understand something like, a bacteria culture, right? Or the way the stars function, like that there is something unique to the human experience that can't be addressed in the same way, right? And I think this is like an ongoing debate, but for me, that is the thing that sets the humanities apart from the social sciences. Right? As one of the disciplines I work a lot in is history. And I find history a really funny discipline because history, for me, is very much a humanist. Is very much a discipline in the humanities, but tries really hard to be a social sciences discipline. And it's really interesting to me the way that kind of desire to be recognized as empirical, as having trustworthy sources, as all of that drives it as a discipline, right? And I feel like we've not really, particularly the humanities in Sri Lanka, and like the conversations that I have, which I agree may be quite limited. I feel like we don't really want to have that conversation about this debate and this history that kind of that allows us to think, or that we have to edit this part out, right? Like this long silences, but yeah, but like this kind of long kind of history that where this point at which these two fields diverge, right? Like debate about human society, right? And for me, it goes back to the question of what is unique to the human experience, right? Like, and how do we understand what the human experience is, right? And the terms on which we understand the human experience. And recognizing, of course, that I'm using that collectively, and of course, there's lots of diversity when you talk about being human, but like that you can't understand human relationships in the same way as you understand relationships within nature. So for me, that is how I understand the humanity, as an attempt to come to terms with the human experience.
I understand, like talking about the context in Sri Lanka and what's happening in the world in general. How do you relate to the crisis in the humanities, Andy? Especially concerning its various dichotomies, like it's the way things are general, the way things are specific, right? So how do you relate yourself, or how do you kind of make sense of this crisis that is happening at the moment, or has been happening
for a while?
For a while.
Yeah, so actually I was looking at your podcast page a little while ago, and I was realizing that you refer to the crisis as kind of singular, right? And the crisis in the arts
Yeah,
and
the
humanities,
crisis.
right? Like that's the crisis, right? And so it kind of seems like there is one crisis. For me, I'm not so sure. Be uncertain about it. I think there are multiple crises, and so maybe it's a plural term, right? On the crises. I think definitely there is a crisis that we are all very concerned about, right? And which is the fact that nobody believes that there is a serious future for the humanities, right? Like nobody, in the sense, I think no administration believes that there is a serious future for the humanities. If you look not just in Sri Lanka, but if you look globally, funding for education across the board is diminishing, but the funding is being cut not from the sciences or technology or engineering or mathematics, or not from the STEM subjects, but they're being cut from the arts, right? And so you have this, and then that also has a knock-on effect, right? Like so, jobs in the humanities are really hard to come by, right? Like I was when I was in the US at Kansas State, I was on a hiring committee, and we had one position open, and hundreds of applicants for one position, right? So if you look at the humanities, a lot of the time the job numbers stay the same, though the number of graduates have been increasing exponentially, right? Like so there's lots more competition for jobs. There isn't funding. Various programs are now trying to dissuade people from doing higher degrees, or trying to get them to think, even if they're doing a higher degree, to get them to think of options outside academia. And so as a result, the humanities and the social sciences, both, I think, the arts in general, are kind of seen as kind of, if you have to if you need to save money, the first thing you cut is the arts, right? And I think the social sciences within that make, because of fields like economics or political science or sociology, are able to kind of make a better argument for why they are needed for a society, right? Like it's much more difficult to convince someone that you need to teach people how to read, right? Like they're like, hey, they learn to read in school, you don't need to teach them to read at university, right? And so there is, for me, a serious crisis in that, right? Like in that the humanities are not seen as important to a society. And so if it's not important to a society, you don't fund it. You don't fund the arts, you don't fund creative work, you don't fund anything that it doesn't have utility value, right? Like, and so utility understood on very narrow terms, right? Like it has to have a direct benefit, otherwise it's not financially viable, right? And so, of course, that's one of the biggest, I guess, problems, right, for the humanities. How do you survive as a field if there is no funding, right? And that's a global problem, right? In Sri Lanka, we have I guess it's inflected by this global problem, right? Like it's there as well. To that problem, which is that a lot of the schools in our country don't have the facilities and the resources to support STEM education, right? And so the majority of students, particularly in poorer areas, are going into the arts for their higher secondary education. And I mean, it's relatively easier to get into university through the arts, but and then a lot of people find jobs, and there are lots of people who graduate with arts degrees, but then employment is a problem, and then you constantly hear the private sector moaning about unemployable arts graduates who don't have the right attitudes and skills, right? I personally think that I don't buy that argument. I mean, I think the in Sri Lanka, at least, has been a miserable failure It hasn't been able to produce jobs. It has relied extensively on government handouts. And in fact, the only way in which the state has been able to respond to the demand for jobs has been to create opportunities for people to go abroad, right? And usually as unskilled labor, right? And so that's and that kind of particularly affects arts graduates, right? Like because there's constantly thing that arts graduates are being pumped out of the system, and they are burdened to public resources, then they are given government jobs, and they are further burdened, and they're straining our economy, and we need to cut the arts, right? Or we need to make them more. We need to make them, we need to introduce systems that would dissuade people from following arts. I mean, for me personally, I think there are definitely questions about facilities and resources in schools. There are definitely questions about opportunities. And I think those are important questions, right? But for me, the answer to those questions is not cut the arts or cut the humanities. But for me, the answer to those questions is to have a serious conversation about the question of social mobility, right? Which is something we don't want to talk about, right? Why do so many young people who go to university or want to get into university not want to work in the private sector? Why do people want to work in the public sector? What is it about a job in the public sector that gives a person, a certain degree of legitimacy, a certain degree of, of job security that they don't feel that they're going to get in the private sector, right? And for me, actually, Professor Uyangoda put this really nicely some time ago in an article he wrote about the 71 revolution. Right? And of course, he's talking about public education, right? But I mean, he says that the problem with education is it promises you a ticket, but it can't guarantee, or it gives you a ticket, but it can't guarantee you that you will arrive at your destination, right? And so for a lot of people, their aspiration is not to be in the private sector. The aspiration is to be in the public sector. And I think we haven't had a serious enough conversation as to why that is. Right? You can't just blanketly blame graduates and say, oh, graduates don't have the right attitude. They are not employable. They are coming. No, that's skipping out on the responsibility, right? Like you're making that the fault of the graduate instead of asking why is it that people don't want to come and work for you, right? Like, what is it about the way you work, how you treat your employees, right, that makes people believe that they'll be more secure with the state, right? And we've not had that conversation enough in Sri Lanka. It's been dominated by conversations about graduate employability. And personally, also, I'm not convinced that you can, that whether like for me it's strange because the entire burden of making someone attractive to the private sector, which is how employability is understood. There's no other way in which employability is understood. Employability only means attractive to the private sector. It's a very limited way of understanding employability. That's a whole other conversation. But the entire way in which employability is understood is the burden, that employability is the burden of the university, right? But actually, a university only has a student for a maximum of 4 years, maybe 3 years, right? Like probably 3 years, more likely. And students already have, they form their, their attitudes, their values. All those things have been formed a long time before that.
Absolutely.
Right? But the responsibility for making them employable within a very short time period, like, you're in school for 13 years and you're in university for 3 to 4 years. Right? Like, responsibility for doing that is passed on to the university. And then the universities are blamed for not making graduates employable without having, there's larger conversations about the structures, about the facilities, the social kind of conditions that have produced this situation. So I feel like if we are talking about crisis in the humanities, particularly the external, is an external crisis that is external in the sense what is seen the outside. It requires us to think deeply about all these questions, and to not accept the answers that the World Bank or the private sector give us just because, and economists, mainstream economists ask us to believe, because I think, to put it very bluntly, that they're wrong. And that there's like their understanding is incomplete, and it's in not being willing to hear the rest of the story that the crisis becomes worse, right? Like, because then you set in place policies and you wonder why they're not working, right? Like you go and you reduce funding, you do all these crazy madcap schemes, you force people to introduce more kind of courses and all of that will make them more employable, and then you still don't want to work in the private sector, and then you still blame the university. But I think you have to ask a question as to why that is. And for me, the way to have that by having a conversation about what are the aspirations for social mobility that are driving people, right? And then ask the questions about colonialism and how, people who had been trained in the arts worked under the colonials, right? Not in STEM, right? Like, and how those kind of modes of working and being for a long period of time have shaped a lot of the ideas about the legitimacy of of a university education and all those things, right? And I guess the other side to it is that we don't want to have that conversation about what is the purpose of university education, right? Like the purpose of a university education to make someone employable, or is it to educate them, right? And for me personally, I would say employability is not something the university should worry about, right? Like we should think about primarily about education. But saying that is I realize that it creates a lot of other questions, right? Because then does that mean that university education isn't for everyone?
Right.
So part of the kind of the government's response has been to say get as many people as possible into universities, right? And if you don't get into university, it's seen as a social failure, right? Various pathways that people want to follow, and where those pathways start, right? Like we set up our system around essentially one exam,
right?
And so many things can go wrong on that day. There's so many things that you have no control over, and it determines your life trajectory for forever, as long as you're alive. And I think we can have, and that's why I think for me, asking those conversations about social aspirations and how those aspirations for social mobility can be met allows us to have a different conversation also about university education. Like, why do you want to learn, any subject at tertiary level? Like what is it for? And I think it's a conversation that we need to have. Maybe it means not just creating more universities, but also creating more kind of specialist kind of professional kind of setups as well, right? Like a lot of university want to be teachers, so more teacher training colleges. Those are the kind of conversations that we need to be having, not just simply, oh, we'll just put them in the university, give them 3 years, and get the university figure out how to make them employable, and they're going to fail, and when they fail, it's always the fault of the university, and this is why us education is bad, and we should all shut this down. I don't think that's the answer at all, right? Like that's completely. But the approach that I'm suggesting is a lot more work. It's a lot more difficult. It's a lot, it requires a lot more listening than people are willing to take the time to do, which is the challenge day and age.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, making any kind of change that is that big takes time. We're talking about like 8 years, right? And so that's going to take time. But hopefully things will change. Because clearly, the way things are going now, I don't see it as being really something that is necessarily good for our society. Because it's just going to make sure that more people are exploited, more people are, more surplus is extracted from people in more and more creative ways, and the rich will get richer, and the poorer will get poorer, and we'll still be where we are today. And I realize that for some people, that's exactly what they want. But for me personally, I don't think that that's the kind of society we should be building. So I think that conversations are really important.
Absolutely. Relating to that conversation, Andy, one of the things, one of the discussions that dominate the Sri Lankan academia, especially the arts, the humanities people, is that this incident that has happened very recently to Professor Saumilianage, and this is not a singular event, but this is one of the prominent things that has been under discussion for some time. What is this symptomatic of? Is this a singular thing, or is this just this? I mean, I'm sure things in the academia are more complex than we see. So, what do you think? What is this symptomatic of? The fine arts and the humanities in general.
Yeah, that's another really great question, Dini. I'm really enjoying these really provocative questions. I mean, I think I spoke of what I was talking about before as kind of the external crisis, right, in the humanities. That's kind of what's being done to the humanities. Crisis that people in the humanities are very aware of, and people who are not in the humanities are also very aware of, right? Like, it's and that's why I see it as something more external, something more visible, something more easily, in some ways, more easily talked about, right?
Okay.
But if you talk about what has happened to Professor Saumilianage, and I use the term professor deliberately, and I'll explain why very soon, I think it points us to the internal crisis in the humanities, right? And that's why I was asking you about crisis as being singular, and I see it as being multiple crises. I mean, I know you have a global audience, and for those of your audience who don't know about what's been happening around this issue, so Professor Saumilianage is probably one of Sri Lanka's best-known actors in the Sinhala theatre and film scene, but he's also an academic. And he is a lecturer at the University of the Visual and Performing Arts, which is one of the few, I think it's one of the few universities dedicated to the fine arts in Sri Lanka. And he has done his PhD at La Trobe University in Melbourne. And I believe he finished his PhD in 2014. And his PhD was awarded in 2015. So this distinction between 2014 and 2015 is kind of important, because basically, I think early last month, the University of Visual and Performing Arts decided that Professor Saumya Lienage, who apart from being professor was also Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies, had not completed his PhD uh, within the within his probationary period, right? And so in the United States, you have tenure track and tenured professors, right? And in Sri Lanka, people are given 8 years within which they have to move from tenure track to tenure. And if you don't make that move, you are let go from service, right? And so the decision that the Council of the University of Visual Arts had arrived at was that Professor Lienage did not complete his PhD within the stipulated time period. And so they took the really drastic decision of deciding to strip him of his deanship as well as his professorship, and demote him. So when I say that his Professor Saumya Lienage, for me it's a political act, because the university no longer recognizes him as a professor. For me, his work, and not just his work as a practitioner, but also his work as a writer, as an author, he is, and I've been there for like the fora that he has organized at the UVPA, and I've realized, what a lot of work he's been doing. But the UVPA, the University of Visual and Performing Arts, has decided that he's no longer should be a professor, and they've decided to strip him of his title. That his appointment as professor did not happen this year. Right? Like he had, once he finished his PhD, he had an interview. And they decided to promote him. So at that point, his qualifications should have been checked. Right? And then that was his first promotion, from tenure track to tenured, right? And then his subsequent promotion was from tenured professor to professor, a tenured lecturer to professor, right? And so he had 2 points at which his qualifications had been checked. And at both points, it was decided that there was no issue with his qualifications, and he was appointed a professor. Now, the council has claimed that what they're doing is they're correcting a mistake that the previous council had made. But that I find that hard to believe, right? Like there are this is a serious kind of question that is happening, that it raises. And for me, it points the finger, or it points towards an internal crisis within the humanities. I think in part it's driven by what is happening externally. Okay. But internally too, I think the humanities are undergoing a change. So the UVPA, University of Visual and Performing Arts, was essentially an art and craft school, right? Like that's how it started, right? And it kept switching hands historically between the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Education, right? Before it was finally set up as a university, right? And I think it raises for me the question of what is the point of a fine arts education, right? Because for a lot of people in the UVPA hierarchy, and there is a sense that a good university education in the fine arts is something that teaches you to be, for example, a better dancer, right? Whereas what people like Professor Saumya Lienage are asking us to do is to consider, what is it that makes you a dancer? What is it that makes you an actor? What does it mean to dance? What does it mean to act? And, if you're going to spend your time thinking about those questions, you're not going to be spending your time necessarily becoming a better dancer as a practitioner, right? Like, so for me, this is a internal tension that is kind of central to the UVPA, right? Like, what is its focus? Is it on becoming better practitioners, or becoming better, becoming better at reflecting on your craft and what it is you do and how you do it? And for me, this is an internal crisis, because I feel like in a lot of the Professor Lianage's case is probably really extreme, right? And it's really unfair. And I think it's really important that there is a conversation locally and internationally about what is happening to him. But I also think that this is part of a larger kind of crisis within the humanities, where the humanities have also started to implode on itself, right? As a result of this intense pressure to have things that are measurable and deliverable, to have results, to show results, right? And as that kind of pressure happens, right, people react in different ways. And one of the ways in which you do that is you also change your focus of your courses, right? Like in a lot of departments, there have been attempts to introduce courses that are more oriented towards the private sector, right? Or and make sure that your your pass out rates are high, right? And so as a result, you don't want to push your students to ask tougher questions. You don't want to push your students to spend time really thinking about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, right? And I feel also students coming into universities now, they particularly in fields like the humanities, particularly as a result of the way our education system has set them up, are not kind of comfortable with figuring out how to learn by themselves, right? Like the lecturer, so it's this very kind of conservative approach to education, where you assume that the lecturer has all the answers, and the lecturer is a bank, right, that you draw from, right? And then it also becomes the lecturer's fault, right? Absolutely. Like, you haven't given me the right answer. Haven't given me. Whereas, like, particularly in fields like, English studies or the fine arts, right? Like, and it started by speaking about uncertainty. Like, there is so much ambiguity, there's so much uncertainty, there is so many things that you don't know for sure, right? And part of what I feel a good humanities education does is teaching people how to navigate, how to understand, how to think about those ambiguities and uncertainties. But the education system that people are trained in when they come to university doesn't allow them to do that, right? Absolutely. Like the demand is for instant answers, right? Like, so I know I have had students who've gotten very upset with me because I've refused to give them a single interpretation of a text. It can be read this way, and it can be read that way, and it can be read that way. There's lots of tensions, right? But I feel like internally also the humanities are struggling. We're struggling to find students who are willing to take those, that time and space to work at those things, to ask those tough questions. And then also that, and I realize that this could be that also, institutions move through. We will find that there will be more and more lecturers who also treat their research in exactly the same way, who treat their teaching in exactly the same way. Students who don't want to ask the questions, and lecturers who don't want to ask the questions. And so, then it's going to be no different then, right? Like you can just call it a technical school, right? You can call it a finishing school. You don't need a university, right? It can be done in any space. And so I think those are, for me, symptoms of an internal crisis. So what has happened to Professor Lianage is a symptom of an internal crisis within the humanities, right? Which we are not willing to talk about as openly because it's a lot more difficult to talk about, because it means asking ourselves a lot of very difficult questions. What are the standards that we think students should be held to, right? What are the standards we hold ourselves to? What do we people who we don't feel meet those standards, right? What do we do with them? Right? What are the kind of institutional, uh, kind of formal policies and approaches we can put in place to encourage, more reflection, more conversation about, is about why we do it, what it's meant, and I think those are, for me, symptoms and questions about an internal crisis that is a much more difficult conversation to have. I think it's a lot easier to have the conversation about the external crisis. It's difficult to have that conversation about the internal crisis. But just because it's more difficult does not mean that we should not have it. I know quite a few people have been talking about what's been happening, but I think we need more of a conversation about it, not just an BA is not procedurally correct, right? Like that's only one part. The other part of the conversation is, what is the point of the art, right? What is the point of an arts education in the university? And the point of a university education, right? Like you can't have those conversations. And those are also internal conversations that are internal to the humanities and the art. That if we don't have those conversations, spaces like the World Bank are going to make those decisions for us, right? And then we'll be complaining about it, but we are not going to be able to do anything about it. And so I think having podcasts like this, but also having these conversations more formally at various institutional levels, at faculty board, at unions, at senates, important, uh, as we ask ourselves, what is it that we're doing? Why are we doing it?
Absolutely, Andi. Just to wrap up the podcast, I'm just going to ask you one final question about your engagement with the communities. I know you've been working a lot outside the academia, and you've been sort of how should I say them, motivated to work with a lot of your colleagues in building spaces outside academia. How do you now, reflecting on the work that you've done and the work that you wish to do, how would you sort of respond to um, establishing such, or rather having such spaces, um, in order to have this conversation going outside the academia?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kind of question because I feel like my answer to that has changed over time. Um, I actually, if you ask me right now, I feel like I'm not really engaging with community in the way that I did before. And part of that has been that I feel after a long time, I've entered the space of the university for the longest time. I mean, for almost 10 years, I was outside the space of the university, and I worked with various different groups and research organizations and people who were not in the university setting. But I'm also hesitant to say that I work with communities. I think from the time I graduated, I've very much been an academic, right? And an academic means that I've been very choosy about the communities that I have worked with, and I've had the luxury of making those choices. But I think community that basically I think that there are some spaces that you can create within the university, and but it's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more challenging. The pressures are different. It's sometimes easier to create spaces outside the university, but but I think the questions about community are far more kind of broader than that, right? Like how do we engage with communities, right? Like and particularly communities that don't traditionally have access to universities. I think a university is a very privileged, right? Like it's a space in which everyone has necessarily access to. You know, I think there are lots of people who have the resources to, even in a country which has free education up to tertiary level, there are still people without resources who go to university. And I think we really need to think about how we create, opportunities for. I like the term not lifelong, I prefer the term life changing. Education, um, not just in formal university spaces, but also how we can use those to create opportunities for people who may not have direct access to those spaces. Right? Like in Sri Lanka, if you don't pass your A levels and get into university, you have very few options to study further, right? And then if that doesn't happen to you, kind of your life gets set for you, right? And I wonder, how do we create spaces for educational opportunities if you say we are a worker in a garment factory, right? What does education mean if you're working 8 to 10, maybe 12 hours a day, sitting at a table and sewing something, right? Like you can't think of education in the same way as you would in the way we do now, right? And I think when we think of the question of communities, it also means about our pedagogical practice, right? How do we, what does it mean for someone who works on a tea plantation to go to university, right? What that means now is that they give up that job. And I realize that that's really what a lot of people want to do. But, what if you can't afford to do that? What if that's the only job you have that's supporting your family? How do you create opportunities for education that aren't just limited to, formal spaces? Right? That's why I say, like, I'm not necessarily the best person to speak about this, because, like, in a lot of ways, my work has been within more formal spaces. Vijay Nagaraj was someone who was very aware of this. In fact, he died in an accident, and one of the things he was doing he was driving actually to Batticaloa to be part of to join a reading group and a kind of it was a study circle that he had worked to set up in Batticaloa with young women on reading about the economy, right? As he wanted them to have the skills necessary to do political economic analysis, to analyze budgets, to make, and so he was driving, overnight through Batticaloa to go and work with them when he met with this accident and passed away. And I think those are the kinds of community-driven spaces, and he called them barefoot economists, right? Like, not economists in this traditional sense, but those are the kind of community spaces that we need to be thinking about working with the community, right? Like, in my own work has been with with uh, with young people, with young researchers, outside formal spaces, in part because I felt that, there weren't really opportunities for young people who are interested in research to really have mentorship and training, right? And I've given that, and so when it was not just me, it was when collective, it was really as a space of what was going on with us. We wanted to, we wanted people to train us. We wanted more opportunities for engagement with, senior academics, people who would mentor us, who would give us training. And the YRC, which is the Young Researchers Collective, was something that grew out of that vision, right? And one of the real kind of tensions that we had within the group, it was constantly something that we reflected on, we asked ourselves about, was the question of what does it mean to be a young researcher and how do we relate to communities, right? Are we just going to be another, privileged space where we get funding and then do the kind of work that we want to do? How do we do research that impacts the community, right? And how do we reach beyond the very privileged confines of what these spaces usually, of who these spaces are usually open to, right? And so we tried it. I don't know how successful. We had the conversations about it, but we attempted it, and I think something I'm very proud of, that space that we tried it. But it's a conversation that's ongoing. I think there's a lot more work to be done. Think about what does a tertiary education mean. We look at it from a community's perspective, from marginalized communities' perspective. If you're a woman employed in the Middle East, if you're a daily wage earner, right? How do we create modes and opportunities for education that doesn't create class hierarchies over and over again, right? So we think about it's a lot more egalitarian and more open, right? And just making sure that we think more broadly about what qualifies what qualifies as an education. Yeah, that would be. I know it's a long answer, but that would be my answer to that question.
Thank you so much, Andy. I enjoyed the conversation as much as the responses that you gave us is so thought provoking and inspiring. Thank you very much for joining with us today. It was, like I said before, a long overdue conversation, but we managed to fit it into our schedule and then have this conversation. Andy, I wish you all the best with your work, your future engagements, your research, uh, your your academic stuff, everything. And I hope we'll get to meet again in a conversation like this. To talk about further, to have this conversation going further. Thank you very much, Andy. It's a pleasure. It's a privilege having you.
Thank you so much, Trini. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I'm really sorry I rambled and rambled and rambled, but thank you for giving me the space to talk about these things. It's been my first interview, and it's been a really, really great experience. So thank you for being such a great host. I wish you all the best as well with this podcast, but also with your own academic endeavors. And thanks again, and I wish this podcast was really well, and I hope it continues. And looking forward to hearing more and more people speaking about these very important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Andi. Thank you very much.